Let United States begin with a fact that is almost never placed in its proper perspective. Egypt charges between $200,000 and $700,000 for a single transit through the Suez Canal. The biggest container ships and tankers can pay more than $1 million. Panama charges roughly $100,000 to $450,000 per transit, with the largest Neopanamax vessels paying up to $500,000. Turkey charges fees for passage through the Bosphorus. Canada charges fees for the St. Lawrence Seaway. The United States does the same, and yet, for decades, Iran has not imposed transit fees on the Strait of Hormuz, one of the most strategically important energy corridors in the world, has effectively remained open without toll charges from Iran, despite sanctions, despite defamation, despite isolation, despite years of being cast as a rogue state. And yet the world is told Iran is the villain. That contradiction alone should make people stop and think. Now, step back and look at the broader picture. What is unfolding in the Middle East is not being presented merely as another geopolitical clash. Increasingly, it is being interpreted as something deeper and more dangerous, a so-called messianic war. A war driven not only by military strategy and state interest, but by apocalyptic thinking, religious extremism, and expansionist ideology. In that framework, this is not just about Iran. Before Iran, there was Iraq. Before Iraq, other theaters. And now, even Ukraine is seen by some as part of the same larger chain of engineered conflicts shaped by ideological forces far beyond ordinary diplomacy. A messianic war is a violent conflict fueled by end-times beliefs. It is the kind of war meant to hasten prophecy, usher in a messianic age, or justify territorial conquest in the name of divine destiny. In the Israel-Palestine context, it refers to factions using religious zeal to justify land, seizure, settlement, expansion, the dream of a third temple, and the broader ambition of greater Israel under the banner of chosenness. And this is where the danger becomes even darker, because once powerful Western states buy into such a worldview, whether openly or indirectly, it becomes a framework for perpetual war, a framework for destabilization, a framework for manufactured crisis. In this view, endless conflict, engineered scarcity, and even man-made disasters serve a broader agenda of centralized control, depopulation, and global restructuring under elite power systems. And if that sounds extreme, then ask yourself this: why does every war in that region somehow circle back to the same networks of influence, the same financial centers, the same geopolitical outcomes, and the same human devastation? Now bring the focus back to Iran. There is a growing belief that the United States was not drawn into this war by necessity, but by pressure, manipulation, and perhaps even blackmail. That Netanyahu pulled Trump deeper into confrontation with Iran against the instincts of parts of Congress and even sections of the Pentagon establishment. Whether that claim can be fully proven or not, what is beyond dispute is that this war has been sold to the public on the basis of a narrative that many serious observers reject. Trump threatened hell on earth for Iran, but on what grounds? On the claim that Iran poses a nuclear danger to the United States. That was the sales pitch. And yet at the very same time, negotiations were reportedly taking place in Geneva on the 26th of February under Omani monitoring. Then suddenly those talks collapsed and Iran was attacked. If that sequence is accurate, then what took place was not diplomacy, it was deceit. It was the use of peace talks as cover for war preparation. And the central justification itself remains deeply contested. Iran does not possess nuclear weapons, according to this view, and even if it did, many military analysts argue it will still not represent a meaningful nuclear threat to the continental United States. Israel, meanwhile, does possess nuclear weapons, yet remains shielded from the kind of scrutiny and hysteria directed at Tehran. That is where the hypocrisy becomes impossible to ignore. Iran's position on nuclear weapons is not only strategic, it is also religious and legal. Within Shia tradition, a fatwa prohibits the production and use of nuclear weapons. This is not just a casual opinion or symbolic statement. In the Iranian religious political system, a fatwa issued by the highest authority carries serious legal and moral weight. It is binding in a way Western commentators often fail to understand or deliberately ignore. So, the question must be asked, do Trump and his defense establishment even understand what a Shia fatwa means, or do they simply not care? Because this is part of a wider Western habit, refusing to understand other civilizations on their own terms, then weaponizing ignorance as policy, and beyond theology, there is also law. Iran signed the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty in 1968 and has never withdrawn from it, not even after the Islamic Revolution of 1979. Israel, by contrast, is not a signatory to the NPT. Yet, for decades, Washington and its allies have accused Tehran while remaining largely silent about Israel's undeclared nuclear arsenal. So again, who exactly is the threat? Who is breaking the rules? And who is being protected while others are demonized? Even more telling is what has happened on the question of regime change. There were clearly those who believed that decapitating Iran's leadership through targeted assassinations would trigger internal collapse. But even voices from the Israeli establishment have admitted that this was a miscalculation. Former senior Mossad official Rami Igra reportedly said the idea that Iranians would flood the streets and overthrow the system after the killing of senior leaders was simply wrong. Why? Because revolutions do not happen by fantasy. They require a genuine popular movement. They require local leadership. They require structure on the ground. Not an exile sitting abroad imagining he can be parachuted in as a replacement. That fantasy failed. And perhaps that is why Trump appeared to retreat from one of his earlier threats to obliterate Iran's energy infrastructure through joint United States-Israeli strikes. Instead, he announced a 5-day pause of sorts, speaking of productive discussions with Tehran and suggesting diplomacy was back on the table. But Tehran denied that any such talks were taking place. That changes everything. Because if Iran is telling the truth, then what Trump called diplomacy was actually market theater, a media performance designed to calm oil markets, buy military time, and create financial movement from which powerful actors could profit. And do not underestimate the importance of Hormuz in all this. Roughly 20 to 25% of the world's primary hydrocarbon energy passes through the Strait of Hormuz. It is one of the most important choke points on earth. Iran's threat was not merely about military signaling. It was about reminding the world that the global economy rests on fragile arteries and that those arteries can be squeezed. Iran reportedly warned that if United States attacks resumed, it would not only target regional energy infrastructure but also desalination plants in the Gulf monarchies across the Persian Gulf. That would be devastating. These states rely on desalination for drinking water and on petroleum-driven electricity for modern life. In other words, the war would not remain neatly contained. It would ripple through the entire Gulf system. Trump then appeared to contradict himself within hours. On one platform, he spoke of very good and productive conversations. Later, he described those same supposed talks as very intense and ongoing, while expressing hope for something substantive. Which is it? Productive or tense? Real or invented? Diplomatic progress or financial manipulation? And this is where the financial angle becomes impossible to ignore. According to market analysis highlighted by the Kobeisi letter, within 10 minutes of Trump's statement about productive US-Iran discussions, the S&P 500 surged by 240 points, adding roughly $2 trillion in value. Less than half an hour later, Iran denied there had been any contact at all. By 8 o'clock that morning, the market had dropped 120 points, wiping out around $1 trillion, though still leaving a net gain of another trillion. That is a $3 trillion market swing in less than 1 hour. Who profits from that? Not ordinary people, not small investors, not struggling workers. The people who profit from that are those with algorithmic speed, insider positioning, financial leverage, and access to massive institutional power. That is why some observers look not just to Washington or Tel Aviv, but to larger financial centers, especially the City of London, as forces that benefit from endless war, managed instability, and market manipulation. The same logic, in this view, helps explain why the Ukraine war also drags on without end. Profit, control, and engineered dependency matter more than human life. Professor Syed Mohammad Marandi, an American-Iranian academic and political analyst at the University of Tehran, has argued bluntly that Israel and the United States are afraid of direct escalation because Iran's retaliation will be severe, not symbolic, not limited, severe, especially against regional energy and electricity systems in the Gulf monarchies. He also suggested that the so-called 5-day pause may have been less about peace and more about cooling oil markets, while financial actors absorb the gains generated by strategic bluffing, then widen the lens once more. If hydrocarbon flows are disrupted and Europe continues arming itself against Russia, the economic consequences for the European Union could become even more severe. Putin has already suggested that Europe will be at the back of the line for Russian gas. For a continent already struggling with economic strain that would amount to another step towards self-inflicted decline, and now comes perhaps the most important development of all. Iran's foreign ministry has reportedly urged the public to wait for the new supreme leader, Mojtaba Khamenei, to clarify his position on the fatwa against producing and using nuclear weapons. That may sound procedural. It is not. It could signal the beginning of a doctrinal shift. For decades, Iranian officials have repeatedly cited the anti-nuclear fatwa as proof that Iran has chosen not to build nuclear weapons. This position, they say, has been verified year after year by the International Atomic Energy Agency in Vienna. If that is so, then the long-running Western claim that Iran is an imminent nuclear threat has been little more than fear-mongering and propaganda. But there is one critical detail. In Shia legal tradition, a fatwa is not frozen forever. It can be reassessed, it can be revised, it can be revoked if circumstances fundamentally change. And that is the great danger now. An unprovoked Israeli-American war against Iran could create precisely the conditions under which Tehran decides that self-defense now requires a nuclear deterrent. Think about that carefully. The very powers claiming to prevent nuclear escalation may be the ones driving Iran toward it. And if that happens, history will not be kind to those who engineered the crisis, sowed the lies, sabotaged diplomacy, and pushed a major regional power into a corner. So this is not just about bombs, missiles, and headlines. It is about power. It is about hypocrisy. It is about theology weaponized for conquest. It is about financial empires profiting from chaos. It is about a global order that condemns one side while excusing the arsenals, occupation, and aggression of the other. And above all, it is about a simple question the world will not be able to avoid forever. Who are the real aggressors? Because in the end, time has a way of stripping propaganda naked. And when that moment comes, the world may finally see that the war behind the war was always bigger than Iran. For deeper analysis across a wide spectrum of geopolitical, economic, and social issues, and to explore a rich archive of thought-provoking articles, I invite you to visit my website at www.oblongmedia.net, where a treasure trove of insightful content awaits. Thank you.